Welcome back, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, whatever part of the country you're in. Or if you're outside of the country, maybe it's good evening. My name is Matt Sprague. I'm a senior product marketing manager for eBuilder and Trimble's owner and public sector. I hope you've been enjoying the summit thus far. I have enjoyed the information provided. We started with Cindy's session, which brought up more of like the big picture and the goals that Trimble are trying to accomplish to help our customers. And then we rolled into Evan, Chris, and Rick doing a bit of a deep dive into the bipartisan infrastructure law, of which, that is what has basically precipitated everything that we're talking about today. And then that rolled into kind of the Dan, Chris, and Hardeep session, which leaned on learning from their experiences and the lessons learned. Now we get the opportunity, and I'm very excited about this. We're going to pop back up to the top and explore that big picture that Cindy was talking about a little bit further. This session is really where the rubber meets the road. Trimble and our customers are making digital transformations happen and demonstrating areas of new efficiency that many did not know that was even possible. So we'll explore a little bit of the agenda. So Ed, if you can push it to the next slide. We have absolutely three fantastic presenters, as you can see alongside me here, that are going to help deliver our agenda. The overall theme is owners leading the way to gain value from model-based projects. So first in line is going to be Brian McInnes, who is the Vice President of Trimble Public Sector. Brian's going to provide us with an update to current U.S. policy and future projections as it pertains to digital delivery of infrastructure projects. Then after Brian, Ed Chappell, who is the director of Trimble Consulting, will provide us with a handful of customer use cases for how digital delivery and connected construction have become a reality in practice. And then lastly, we will be joined by Tricia Stefanski from the Minnesota Department of Transportation to explore an additional use case and to provide a customer perspective on the benefits of that journey. One last thing, bit and piece here. You're going to not hear much more from me outside of passing along questions from you, the attendees. So make sure that you utilize the chat panel or the Q&A area within the Hopin platform to ask those questions. I'll be monitoring it. One of my colleagues, Evan, will be monitoring it. And as they run through, we'll either interject them into the session or we'll hold them and answer those questions at the end. But please, don't be bashful, ask away. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand it right over to Brian to get into the details.
Great. Thank you, Matt, for that excellent introduction. And welcome back, everybody, from the break. I'm Brian McInnes, as Matt had introduced me, the VP of Trimble's Public Sector. Thank you for joining us today. And I want to get right into the presentation. And I have starting point is going to be talking about a policy update around Everyday Counts 6 and why this is important to us, or the Everyday Counts program specifically, and why this is important to us as we go through and in the industry goes through this paradigm shift in the way that they do business and conduct business to execute projects. So first and foremost, to start this off, FHWA plays a critical role in advancing digital transformation. Without their influence and without their policy and guidance, I believe that we would be much further behind than where we are today. And the U.S. as a whole is much further behind than Europe and other places, the way they execute projects, which Ed will talk about in a minute. But one critical program for us, talking about digital transformation and digital project delivery in that regard, is the Federal Highway Administration's program around Everyday Count 6, which is the current program, and how it defines digital as-built. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Everyday Count 6 in this program, the program itself is designed to take proven strategies and technologies that are developed but underutilized. So in other words, it would be an existing potential technology that's out in the market but hasn't had it's had narrow or little adoption, or maybe no adoption at all, but it is off the shelf ready technology that can help the owner and stakeholder communities to advance and make certain gains in both project delivery. It can help with roadway safety, reduction in traffic congestion, integrate automation. So there's a number of things that Everyday Count 6 can help do and speak to. But in this specific instance, we'll talk about how it helps us in digital transformation around digital as-builts. So the digital as-builts that FHWA actually put guidance out for the 2021-22 cycle, actually, or program, counts digital as-builts as the accumulation of data used during digital project delivery that produces a living record of the, and I'll do the quotations, as constructed infrastructure for agencies' future business needs. So that's a lot. What does it mean? It means that when the keys get handed over to the owner or the maintenance managers and the people who actually are responsible for the assets at the close of the construction, that also handover actually translates into the as constructed model. The intent here is the as constructed model actually goes to the M&O, or maintenance and operation phase. So this is the technology that FHWA, or the methodology that FHWA calls out for. They recommend that digital as-builts feed into an integrated workflow in which the completed construction data reflects the as-built condition, and then they talk to for future maintenance, asset management, and next life cycle scoping. So we take the model as designed to the as constructed to the as maintained. So in this particular program for EDC 6, spelled around digital as-builts, specifically EDC 6 calls out the benefits of digital and the model. So we are starting to see this now in practice. There, if you look to the right, this is through EDC 6's progress report on how digital adoption is taking place within the community, within the owner community. The last report was the progress report, April of this year. And the progress report calls out actually the states who have fully adopted digital delivery. Actually, it was March of this year, excuse me, calls out digital project delivery, the states that are fully implemented, the states that are assessing, and the states that are demonstrating. So the baseline goal for FHWA was 27 states digitally going through digital adoption or using digital as-builts as the model to take into the construct and then across to the operate and maintain realm. So the map here displays exactly how many states. Currently, we have a number of states who don't, though, have digital models in their actual work plan or their state of practice today. So we have a long ways to go as far as some of the gaps are concerned without any usage of digital models. So then the intent from EDC 6, because this is a 2-year program, now moving into the EDC 7, FHWA has upped the game, so to speak, and they said, okay, you're going to, in EDC 6, we're calling for you to actually take your data as constructed and hand it off. Now they're talking about in EDC 7, taking the digital twin and leveraging that data to actually manage the enterprise for asset management. So taking the data from the as constructed and actually bringing that into a maintenance management system and having decision making based around prescriptive maintenance and other things that will help improve efficiency on the maintenance side. So back in April of this year, Everyday Counts program called for ideas on digital twins specifically to address enterprise data for asset management. So that's an important step because there's continuity between EDC 6 and EDC 7. So as we see, the model then will permeate the entirety of the design, build, operate life cycle or workflow, and actually translate into enormous cost savings, which Ed will speak to in just a second. Next slide. So tying this EDC 6 and the future EDC 7 into the programs and process, getting it part of the state of practice, if you will, at DOTs, they're called out in IIJA is a source of funding. That's directly applicable, if you will, to the adoption of digital as-built and standing up programs around digital transformation. So this is linked through the qualifiers that will allow you to actually, through a grants program that's going to come out through FHWA later in the year, Advanced Digital Construction Management Systems is specifically identified in IIJA, or the infrastructure bill, bipartisan infrastructure law, to help with the cost of adoption of some of these tools and capabilities. So in the IIJA, the program is funded at $20 million a year, or $100 million over 5 years. And the goals of the program in IIJA is specifically for digital transformation, and it's to maximize interoperability with other products, tools, or applications, boost productivity, manage complexity, reduce project delays, costs, and overruns. That's going to tie directly to the digital as-built and the model and the benefits that can provide. And specifically, digital as-built and digital project delivery technologies are interrelated with this program. So I give this to the audience to let you know that if you're making this journey and this transition, and you're just now starting to adopt digital as-built or thinking about taking the digital journey, there's certainly going to be funding and assistance and help out there to be able to help you with this transformation. And that's some of the things that Ed's going to talk about here in the next few slides.
Great. Thanks, Brian. All right. And so on the next few slides, I'm going to give you an overview of some example projects and an owner in Norway who have started working on this quite a while ago. So they started on their journey in around 2006. There were a couple different reasons. One of the major reasons they had to start on this initiative that long ago is they don't have a lot of funds, but they do have a lot of infrastructure to own and operate. So one of their goals, which I like, is more road for the money, is what their vision is in terms of what they're trying to do with BIM and digital twins. I think the other piece of it is, which is important to note, is they also had a major event in 2006 where they had a major tunnel collapse on the main north-south route within Norway. So it really did force them to look at how do they do better at digital twins and information to serve the public. So talking about the Norwegian Public Road Authority, this is where they sit today. They actually give incentives and will rank bids where model-based construction and design is ranked above drawings from a contract perspective. So that's one of the things pushing for BIM in infrastructure within the region. They put a very high, let's say, quality requirement on ground service data. This is what we call existing conditions. So knowing what kind of conditions you actually have before you even start construction is critical. Using structured data and standard formats for data. This is another piece where they are very far ahead. They don't have any challenges with different contractors, design engineers coming into projects and sharing information. I think that this is a big key for why they have been successful in a lot of their efforts towards digital delivery and digital twins. They do require 3D modeling of all disciplines. So that could be earthworks, it could be structures, it could be all kinds of elements within a project. So this allows them to do certain things like clash detection, which you're going to hear a little bit about from our friend Trish at MnDOT later in the presentation. This is a big way to save money as well as reduce risk on any project, building or infrastructure. So that's one big thing that we're focused on for the state DOTs today. Stake out data from the model. So let's use the model for our workflows in the field. There's a big change in the survey arena today where it's becoming more popular and more adopted to take model data out to field devices so that surveyors can actually see what they're staking out from a construction standpoint. Same thing with the contractors. So use the model for all the workflows in the field. This also allows us to capture as-builts. So I think one of the big pieces you're going to hear from Trish and MnDOT on is if you don't start in the design phase, the early phase of your project with the end in mind, meaning your as-built and your digital twin, then it's going to be very hard for you to get there without doing it. This is just a good quote from the Norwegian Road Authority. They actually started a separate organization called Navier that actually does all of their BIM data requirements and technology requirements for them as a road authority. This really has helped transform the entire industry within the country much faster because this organization can work separately. They set the requirements. They work directly with both the owner, the design engineer, and the contractors to develop those requirements. And so they've been working on this since 2006, and they really have a great vision for where they want to take it beyond just, let's say, the digital twin deliverable. So here's a good case study that I wanted to share with you guys on 6 different projects that were done in Norway. They were analyzed in kind of 2 different categories: traditional delivery, which is typically what you'll see today, where you've got 2D drawings as kind of your contractual deliverable for design and for as-built. There's not a lot of collaboration incentives in the contracting model. And we compared that with model delivery based projects. So this is where you have a 3D design model and collaboration is either required or incentivized, meaning that designer, owner, and contractor are all working around the same 3D model. These are projects that are just solely infrastructure. So you'll see a comparison just on the infrastructure here. You know, BIM for the building world has been around a lot longer. So I think the value there has been proven out. It's been a little tougher to do that in the infrastructure side, but the results are very promising, and we'll share some of those with you. I think the third point, which is becoming more important to a lot of owners across the globe, is that they actually did see that both change order reductions and sustainability were improved by moving to a BIM or digital delivery approach on these projects. So I'll cover that for you. So this is one of the first road projects that Trimble and the Norwegian Road Authority looked at. It was roughly a $31 million job. They had about $6 million in change orders on this project, which was roughly 19% of that overall contract budget for the project. And this was on a traditional project. When we dug into those change orders, I think this is really important for owners. We saw that about half of them were unforeseen events, which is really what a change order is for, right? If you're building something, you encounter something that wasn't planned or known, then you do have to have the ability to manage a change order. However, 44% of the issues they saw on the project and the change orders that resulted from those errors or omissions were actually related to design and design data. So this was a target for the owner. They knew that if they set better standards for use of a 3D model and data standards for collaboration around that 3D model, they could greatly reduce those errors and omissions in design, and therefore reduce both the cost and the number of the change orders that they were seeing on projects. So we'll look at a different example. This is actually one done with a 3D model as a contract object and a collaboration incentive on this particular project. So you had about a $56 million contract budget. The change orders were roughly 5.4 million, or close to 10% of the overall contract budget. And when you looked at the actual issues, you saw a very large reduction in the errors and omissions in the design data. Down to 18% from 44. So you're talking about a dramatic reduction in risk, schedule impact, as well as cost to move to this type of a approach for digital delivery and digital twins. So here's one other example I wanted to share with you. This is another Norway project with Skanska as the contractor on this particular one. It starts with bidding documentation. So one of the things that I think a lot of owners are starting to look at, including MnDOT and other DOTs within the US, is How do we put the right bidding documentation together, right? How do we set the expectation with the design engineer and the contractor upfront before the project starts on what's expected, what data, what models, right? What types of delivery? Those types of things do need to be put into the bidding documents, and they do need to be vetted with your project partners so that you actually come up with a requirement that's executable, one, but that one gets you through a project, and two gets you to that digital twin and asset data that you need for that ongoing maintenance. And this is where I was talking about the vision that the Norwegian Road Authority has. They're already pretty much at the 3D deliverable and digital twin aspect. They're starting to add more 4D, which is the time or scheduling component requirements to their projects, as well as 5D cost. So use the model and the digital design to dynamically update costs as you progress on a design phase or a construction phase. You can actually adjust those costs if you're tying it back to your design model. Then they want to take it further. Sustainability, as well as maintenance and operations and asset management objectives, take them beyond, let's say, the 5D that most folks know of in BIM into other dimensions of value. And what this tells you is that the Norwegian Road Authority, as an owner, they see a ton of extra value in the data they already have and in the technology they're already using with their project partners. This is what allows them to go into this progression to get more improvement as an owner. So this is the most recent example that we have seen with the Norwegian Road Authority. It actually set a record as the country's shortest construction phase. It was 20% below the original project estimate in terms of budget. They cut their change orders due to that design and air emission down to less than 2% of the overall budget for the project. And using models across their project partners, they had very low level of conflicts between trades or between their contractors and designers. So this really did help them optimize the entire project. And they got what they wanted, which was lower costs, reduced risk, and a shorter schedule. Now, here was the surprising aspect of that same type of approach. What they saw was that by moving to a digital delivery and digital twin approach, they actually cut reduction of greenhouse gases by 25% compared to the traditional method. This was through things like optimization of asphalt placement on paving, reduction of fuel burn on a lot of the machines. If you're optimizing your design ahead of construction, then your costs and your fuel burn are optimized before you've even started construction. They optimize the concrete quantities, which allows you to then do an analysis on your design in terms of CO2 emissions. And then they also optimized the vegetation because there were two large fauna passages that went over this particular road. So that covers some of the lessons that we've learned from Norway. And it's actually a lot of those lessons that we share with folks like MnDOT and Trish, who's going to speak next. So Trish, I'm going to hand it to you and we'll get started on your section.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dan, Matt, Brian, Ed. Two really important things. Like the first thing is, I think we should all travel to Norway. That's for sure.
Yes.
And then the second thing that I have a Bigfoot poster behind me. And I just want to say that implementing digital as-built in BIM is much easier than finding Bigfoot.
Agreed.
So, yeah. So I think I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I really wanted to represent MnDOT and other DOTs at realizing that this is a journey. And so really taking small steps in the right direction. And Ed and I now have known each other about a year or so, working on this project and saying, he knows, I say, well, this is what asset management needs. This is what we're looking for. So construction projects maybe last a year. This one, and specifically Trunk Highway 169, is going to be 3 construction seasons, big project. But then all of those assets we're going to own for 50 years, for hundreds of years for bridges. And so having that, I think, I would say having your house a little bit more organized on the front end makes all the difference on the back end. So I do say that to Ed a lot, like this is kind of what our stakeholders need. This is what our asset owners need. This is what maintenance needs to really extend the life of these assets and optimize the life cycle. So this project is a large $130 million construction project. We don't have a lot of these anymore. We do have some, within, this is District 3. Right now I'm sitting in Minneapolis, St. Paul, our metro district. So just across the river, our friends in District 3 taking on this project, turning this ACRADE. And my friends in Elk River are always asking me, what's the status of the project? Where should I'm like, go to the website. But basically changing this ACRADE to a freeway, 5 proposed interchanges, 3 miles of reconstruction. And the great part about this pilot, I would say to always pilot these things first, was that it was a CMGC, which means we had this partnership from the beginning. And I did not realize, again, Ed, how great of a partner Trimble was going to be, how great of a partner we were going to have in Bentley, and then Agile Assets. So really, we all came together, Ames Construction, WSB, to make this a success. It's been a continuous iterative design. And again, speaking from the advantages of not only, which I am more probably concerned in my current role in the asset information model, but as well as just really, to me, 3D design is it's just intuitive. Next slide. The costs. Ed talked about costs. You really have to show the savings. You really have to say, because it's a big change for our construction inspectors. It's a big change for our designers. It's time consuming to learn, but again, worth it upfront. So really showing these cost savings and utilizing. So you can see the Elk River current cost status at the beginning of the project, August 2020, over that 130 million guaranteed maximum price. And then as we're going through the 3D design, the model coming down each quarter, and I just met with the District 3 district engineer yesterday, and he was saying, Trish, we save $15 million on that project. And I thought, yep, I'm going to present that tomorrow. I didn't tell him that, but he knew that $15 million cost savings. So big savings implementing 3D design.
Yeah,
Next
and
slide.
I would add, Trish, just for the audience, one area where we think owners have a big opportunity is in the model clash detection. So an example on this project where Trish and her design engineer and contractor Ames worked really well together was around the site utilities. There were a lot of utilities that had to be built or moved on this project. So just having a full accurate model of all those utilities and being able to do what we call clash detection, which is see if there are any clashes between, let's say, those utility models and the bridge or the roadway models, really help drive a lot of the savings. The MEP or utility systems are typically a very high cost asset for an owner. That's both building and infrastructure owners, actually. So I think this is a good example where just taking that pilot step, like Trish said, using a 3D model in the design phase and doing some clash detection really yielded a lot of great results. And Trish, I would also say that just having the contractor Ames be able to provide input before construction was really valuable, right? I think they were able to give you guys a lot of good input.
I don't know how many iterations there were, Ed, but I think it was over 40 iterations.
There were over 40 different design iterations between you, WSB, and Ames, yes.
Yeah.
And the nice part is because it was digital, they didn't take a long time. You guys would iterate on a weekly basis. Right. So you could make changes that quickly because it was all
absolutely digital. And this was an urban city with lots of matching, cross slopes, pedestrian infrastructure. I mean, it was a complicated location in which, again, the iteration was just essential. I think it was key. I don't know. We would have had a lot of change orders.
I agree. And I think the other benefit that I talked about a little bit before that we saw in this project is because you guys were able to hand a good digital design model to Ames as the contractor, they actually were able to better estimate and do their takeoff on concrete as a good example. So your ability to look at that sustainability around concrete and CO2 emissions, it's actually there because you're handing the data to the contractor to do that, improvement, right? And when they hand it to their concrete vendor, you've got a better, overall work supply chain of that material.
Yep, that's huge. I have those bullet points, Ed, on the next slide in my head.
That's great.
Does this have...
Well, I put this one in here because I think I wanted you to talk to the group about the challenge of getting your users in the field to use 3D and visualize it, right? Like, I think part of what would be good for the audience to hear from you, Trish, is where are you having challenges, right, with different users within the organization, and how do we use the model to show them, right, the value of the model, the value of what you're doing in asset management even. I think that's a big piece for them, for this audience.
Yeah. Is there a video here? I just kind of want to thank WSB for this piece.
I didn't do the whole video because I didn't know if we would have enough time.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, so I think, okay, so starting out with a pilot, really knowing what you need in your asset management system, having a container ready. And then we do at MnDOT, we do a lot of, I think, from the bottom up, top down. So talking strategically to your leaders about all the cost savings, why this is important, and how we can move slowly again through these steps. And then the bottom up approach really is about training. It's about support. It's about guidance. It's about looking ahead, agency-wide perspective. And one of the people that I know really well who has retired, he said, people listen to their boss. So sometimes you can be in another section like asset management, and I can be asking design to work on some things, but kind of coming in and saying, okay, how about these leadership positions? How about, again, top-down approach. And then what can we provide? What can we help with? How can we offer support and training? And then communication, and Ed knows this too, like we keep talking about it and talking about it. People are like, all right, that's enough. I'll do it. But communication, you can't underestimate the power of communication. And I did just talk to our construction folks, just a couple of weeks ago and said, we're really looking forward to getting this asset information. And this is what they know, kind of what we're working on, and we're partners with them. But one of the key things was, what are you going to do with all that data? What is asset management? How does it benefit? And so I said, great. I teased, I'd give me 90 minutes and I'll give you all the benefits of asset management. I'm so glad you asked.
Right.
So really understanding, again, I don't know, there is a bit of a disconnect in the, I think, CAD GIS world, as well as maybe the design, construction, maintenance, asset management world. So trying to connect those dots across the agency.
Yeah. And I think an important thing too that we've seen is, folks are a little bit scared of the change to using a model, right? Or taking that on. But you don't have to be a BIM expert or a survey or construction expert to visualize model data, right? I think that's one of the advantages, Trish, is visual data with a model can appeal and be useful to any user, right? Regardless of their experience.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. So here's the why digital as-built. So we wanted you to give a kind of a summary on why this is important to you in MnDOT.
Right. So, I mean, we've been working ever since I started, I think my second day at MnDOT, I said, we're not getting as-built information and we really need to do that. But now it's more than just getting that data at the end of a project. It's really saying, we want to capture this data. As you've heard, I'm sure, since the beginning of this conference, we want to get this data because we want to know what's happening to our assets, and we want to utilize the data throughout the whole life cycle. So any minor and major asset changes in costs, we really want to capture that. We want to capture modifications. We want to capture, what activities are being done. We need to know the changes to the asset classes, just like the pavement. I mean, we want to know if the pavement's crack filled. We want to know if it's a major rehab. We need to know those things so that we can predict what to do at the right time, when, and how much it's going to cost. Federal law also says that we need to create our transportation asset management plans. We were one of the pilot states. You can probably hear my Minnesota accent every once in a while come through. 2014, we were the first state to pilot. 3 states piloted these TAMP plans. And right off the bat, we said, well, we're going to do more than pavement and bridge. We're going to include all these other ancillary asset classes. And that also has been really instrumental in knowing exactly what we want to capture for signal systems, utilizing ITS assets within asset management as well as operations. So that's one thing that we need to do. And our TAMP Chapter 6 is all about life cycle planning. And the life cycle planning means give us scenarios, tell us what is the best thing to do when. And the only way we can predict and know and understand deterioration is by knowing what's happening in the construction side of the house. state law says go for state one call. We need to know what's underground. We need to provide that information as the owner. It's a state law. There's so many reasons, right? And then also I did a study when I was a traffic engineer on utilizing sign data right in design plans. Signs, there's several asset classes that can go right from the enterprise asset management system to design. Signs are one of those things. We found a 30% cost savings to utilize that sign data for design, and do have that in efficiencies report if anyone would like to see that. And then I'm excited to be on another panel today to just talk about the IIJA funding, thinking about the big, upcoming things like resiliency and sustainability. In order for us to really understand resiliency and then to be better, suited for flooding, for, any kind of natural disasters, climate change, we need to know where our assets are. We need to know the size of our assets. All these things. And we do have a new extreme flood vulnerability tool that was developed utilizing some of those inverts actually on our culverts, and also as well as the culvert locations. And then lastly, we have a leadership vision that I kind of talked about a little bit earlier, but really knowing that asset management is and BIM, it's a strategic, it's a synergy relationship where we can collaborate, work together. So directly in our asset management strategic implementation plan, we call out building information modeling, we call out innovation. I think you can go to the next slide.
Yep.
Some snippets there. So again, I don't know how many people here really talk asset management. This is my daily thing I do, but asset management, we really want to, again, manage the transportation assets by mitigating risk. And I feel like this is so similar to what we're talking about throughout the design model here, throughout life cycle, optimizing return on investment and using the best available information and tools. So at Minnesota DOT, we really are not only looking at this from design, construction, design world, but also what are we looking for in that vision of asset management.
And
so
one last thing I would ask,
Absolutely.
for you to share, Trish, is, with this audience, you've done a pretty good job and are one of the first DOTs to look at prioritizing, assets, right? What assets do we want to put as a priority to go get data, right? Can you just walk them through? How did you look at all of the assets you're responsible for and start prioritizing? Was it, I know a little bit, but was it a combination of, cost, right? Maintenance costs versus, new build or repair costs? How did you do that prioritization of your assets? I think that would help.
Yeah, that's a great question. That was a great effort. I got to chair our data matrix. If you watched the movie The Matrix, it was a data matrix team. And we found over 78 asset classes we identified within the MnDOT right away. Identification is first. Green assets were included, our snowplow routes were included, just thinking about what you maintain. And then looking at different drivers. So how maybe important are those assets? What's the risk if an asset fails? How many consumers are using asset data? What is the total cost? I can literally, anyone that's interested, send you the entire spreadsheet of these different assets, of how we kind of basically made columns in the spreadsheet and looked at this sort of overall the drivers and how we want to maintain those assets. So then we looked at maintenance of the assets. Was it going to be reactive maintenance? Was it going to be minimum maintenance? Well, minimum maintenance came first, I apologize. Then reactive. We had categorizations of how we would maintain these assets. Pavement and bridge kind of being full blown, condition plus based. I didn't know I was going to speak on this right now, so I'm glad that it sounds okay. But we literally had, just categories of management, and then within each category, it told us if we're going to do cycle plus, for example, on our signal systems, we want condition data. If we're going to just do minimum maintenance for our ditches, we actually are just going to not even have an inventory. We're just going to know they're there if someone contacts us. Those were decisions that were made. So it was, where do we want, what kind of data do we need for each asset class? And then what data don't we need? And we did leave some assets out within that process. So that set
Yep.
the stage, Ed, to say this is where we want to go in the next 3 to 5 years, which each asset class, full inventories, full condition assessments. And then we looked at the technology and how to do it and what some of the best technology needs are. So yes, that's a whole nother presentation that I could do.
It is. But I think one of the first benefits that you got as an owner was you now have a way to hand that prioritized asset list to any design engineer or to your design team at MnDOT. And so they know, right, starting a new project, what's important to you, right? What assets might be on that project, new or existing. And that's a big step forward, right? That wasn't happening in design.
Yep.
Right, before
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. And all
gonna-
those data dictionaries and all that is solid. And we do, in Minnesota, we have some state statute, 17403, that was just passed, that actually requires asset management inventories. And I don't think other states really have seen that before, but I think that's coming. One of the assets in there is geotechnical assets. So we've really been focusing on geotechnical assets. So
great.
So I do have a couple questions from the audience. The first one is, and it's really opened up to all three of you, is that the conversation seems to be very roads and bridges DOT oriented, even when we're looking at the Norway roads. But the concepts here, do they apply, and have they applied with other types of case studies that are non-roads and bridges?
Yeah, I'll jump in first and give you the example. So a lot of what, for instance, Norway learned, or what we're implementing with Minnesota, it actually was learned from the building side of the business. And so a lot of these concepts, like designing a building with your asset management in mind, is the same approach, right? If you don't know what assets are important when you're designing your building or designing a retrofit of that building, then how are you going to manage those important assets once you get completed, right? And I think this really the key, Matt, for any asset, right? It doesn't matter if it's infrastructure, horizontal assets or vertical. And a good example is most DOTs, a good example is Texas and California, both own over 2,000 buildings each, right? Minnesota owns hundreds of buildings as a DOT. So they have both types of assets, right? And the same type of approach would work for your building assets, meaning whoever is managing those from an asset management perspective, they have to go work with design. It has to happen in that phase early, so that as your design data and workflows go into construction, you have a link back to your asset data, right, in that design. It's collected, right, during construction. So one of the key things is, and what Trish and MnDOT have done, is if you know what assets are important, you can populate that attribute data in your model, right? So when the model goes to the field systems, machines, survey devices, data collectors, now you're actually collecting data with a tie back to that asset and that asset management system. So that when you actually get a digital as-built, right, your digital twin model, you now can integrate that back into your asset management system. So it doesn't really matter if you're a building owner or a bridge and road owner, that same kind of approach really will give you the same type of value. And I think the utility example is a great one that shows, buildings typically have more cost tied up in MEP systems, right? As an example, because they've got electrical, they've got HVAC systems. And so maintaining that and taking a life cycle approach for those types of systems as assets requires the same thought process and approach that you've seen from Norway, or what Trish and MnDOT were talking about. So, I would say that the building side of the business, in terms of building construction, they're a little farther along because they have good BIM standards. They have what they call level of detail standards for design, which we're still working on for roads and bridges, as an example. And level of detail is just how detailed do I model from a design and as-built standpoint. And as an example, for building BIM, that's down to the nut and bolt level, right? If you want an accurate as-built or digital twin, you've got to model everything in design and then capture those items, very accurately when you finish those projects up or when you install them, right, during construction. So it's the same concept is what I would tell you. And I would say, if you're a building owner, the good news is the data standards are farther along and it's going to be an easier journey. If you're on the infrastructure side, folks like Trish are really kind of blazing the trail for horizontal assets. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody have anything to add before I wrap it up?
Yeah, Trish, I'd be curious, like, you guys own buildings, right? I think your approach is going to be similar as an owner, right?
we do, and we have our buildings in our as-built spec. But again, not getting that at the very end of the project, but really looking at more of the model, 3D model as well as asset information model. So, yep, I'll be excited to work with them. And Ed, you're not going anywhere.
I won't.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to all three of you for coming on to the Infrastructure Summit and sharing all of your experiences and your knowledge.